Thank you. Well, let me see. Thank you, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I thank you. Way too much attention for the average man. Well, I did wonder whether you'd recognize me. 4 of my 5 children were born here. I came with Good Sam. I came here in 1959 with a baby and a buggy in the back seat and a wife and no furniture. And I thought, well, I'm going back there. And will they know, will they remember? And sure enough, a guy in the lobby said, "Hey, Merv." And yes, I did live across the street from Irma Bombeck. Now, don't get me started. We got a lot to do here tonight, but she interviewed me when she worked for the Kettering Oakwood Times. And I looked up, and the next thing I know, in the 70s, of the top 10 best-selling books in America, top 10 for the decade of the 70s, she had 2 of them. I had her on the Donahue show often. I'll never forget, in St. Louis, we had probably 7,000 people in the audience, and I'm running around, and here's little Irma sitting up on that stage all by herself, and I'm way up in the balcony. A woman stood, and she said, "Irma, I understand you live next door to Phil Donahue. What's Phil Donahue really like?" And she said, "He peeks in windows." We're going to never forget the girl. She still lives and shines out from refrigerator doors all over the world. I am pleased to be appearing here tonight at the invitation of Wake Up Ohio, and so many people who've worked so hard, including my very close personal friend, the conscience of the Miami Valley. I speak of Maddie Breslin. And a woman we should be surprised, just as much energy, just as we bused our kids, Maddie and I, to St. James School in downtown Dayton. We were out there in the 60s saying, you know, the Catholics were raising another generation of racists, and that you can't come out of our schools in white church, white priests, white nuns, white statues, white saints. We had, the Blessed Trinity was white. You had God the Father in a white beard. Jesus was white, and the Holy Spirit was a dove that was white. And that we wanted to give our kids a special, broaden their cultural experience. And we, oh my dear, we were the troublemakers of Centerville, Ohio. The place still isn't the same. Yes, we did. And we had, and here, should we be surprised that Maddie's daughter, Stephanie Breslin, should have the same power, the same conscience, a wonderful, wonderful young woman who really ought to be your next congressperson. I wish she would run for Congress. And thanks to Phil Hagerman and his wife for being so good to us and meeting me at the airport and making me feel like such a big shot. I rode in from Vandalia in a Cadillac. I mean, you know. I have, as you know, made my living now for so many years in commercial television, and I have had a front row seat to modern corporate media. And I am a slow learner. I'm too soon old and too late smart. But I have come to appreciate how much the American experience is being robbed of true democracy because we have a media that is so beholden to the bottom line, much more concerned about the price of their stock, than they are about sticking their nose under the tent to learn what the righteous public servants have in store for us. Instead of covering power, they have become part of power. They dine with power. They drink with power. They go on picnics with power and trips with power. Instead of being what the framers envisioned media to be, the fourth estate, that little barking dog that keeps nipping at your heels and bothering you. Instead, we've become part of the establishment that we're supposed to cover. I know something about that. And don't let anybody tell you that we're more diverse than ever. I have 600 channels. I have the dish. I have 600 channels in my house. And 500 of them are selling the Bowflex machine. There is no diversity. In the middle of this corporate collection of larger and larger companies, smaller and smaller in number, telling us what putting commercials between all those other commercials. You can't get on television, any of the talk shows today, unless you're selling something. So between the commercials, we're seeing another commercial. And we are broadcasting corporate values. Media beat the biggest drum for this war and wouldn't think of sending their own kids to fight it. In the middle of this, in the middle of this corporate soup, there has emerged one of the most fabulous expressions of what journalism and media can be that this nation has ever known. I do not overstate the case. A woman who is beholden to no sponsors, no corporation, a woman who doesn't care if the White House doesn't call her back, a woman who does not get invited to the White House Correspondents' Dinner, a woman who will not be found where they're giving out plaques and congratulating each other, a woman who is that outsider, whose own personal motto is to go to where the silence is, to go to those powerless people who are ignored by media. You can't get on Meet the Press if you're not Condi Rice or Rummy. By the way, Cindy Sheehan has never been invited on Meet the Press, never been invited on Face the Nation. Michael Moore was never invited on. If you put, well, he was the center of the campaign, the presidential campaign. No matter how you felt about his movie, I mean, they were around the theaters around the world. You didn't see him on mainstream media. Follow the ball cap, and you'll see media is interested in power, because if they don't get the biggies on, then they don't have credibility. So that's why we have to know that we are not hearing the voices of dissent, except on Democracy Now!, on Pacifica, on public access TV. And it is my honor to be at the place where my show was born, to be finally appearing on a stage with the media person I admire the most. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Amy Goodman.
Thank you, Phil.
Did I do all right?
Oh, the word
All right,
ridiculous.
you're right.
Someone's confused.
There's a standing for you, girl. I'm Jim Baker, and this is Tammy Faye, and we want to thank you. Well, Amy, I meant what I said, and I am so impressed with what you've done here. You're in almost 300 public access stations. This is so unbelievable. Nobody has tried to hang a corporate logo on you. You're out there being without the pressure of, you don't care if the White House calls you back. I'm not sure you even call the White House. So tell us how this happened, and please give this assembly of people of conscience your overview on media, why it's important, our democracy, and the 21st century.
Well, first of all, I think there's some mistake because I'm here to interview Phil Donahue. But It's a real great honor to be here in Dayton, and well, it's wonderful to be here. There is so much that has to be done with the media to take back the airwaves today. You know, I come from Pacifica Radio originally, and that is an independent network, the only completely independent network broadcasting in the country today, that was founded in 1949 by a World War II conscientious objector named Lou Hill. When he came out of the detention camps after World War II, he said there has to be a media outlet that's run not by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists. And that's how Pacifica was born. The first station, KPFA in Berkeley, some of you may know, 1949. Then in Los Angeles, KPFK. My station in New York, WBAI, 1960. WPFW in Washington, and KPFT in Houston. Went on the air in 1970. Just was one of the few that said it was going to stay through the hurricane. Well, it has quite a history. That station in Houston, in the first few months of operation in 1970, well, it's the only radio station in the country, not once but twice, was blown off the air. The Ku Klux Klan strapped dynamite to the bottom of the transmitter. And I don't know if it was the Exalted Cyclops or the Grand Dragon. I confuse their titles a lot. But he said it was his proudest act. And I think it's because he understood Pacifica's dangerous precisely because it allows people to speak for themselves, to describe their own experience. And that is so rare today. When you have on all of the networks, and Phil's show, the Donahue show, was a rare exception way back and really should be a model today. The idea of having people on from different communities who are the experts in their own lives. Instead, the networks have this small circle of pundits who know so little about so much explaining the world to us. What Pacifica is about, what Democracy Now!, our broadcast, is about, a daily grassroots global news hour, is allowing people to speak for themselves, which breaks down stereotypes and caricatures that fuel the bigotry that feed these hate groups. In the 50s, you had Paul Robeson, whitelisted from almost every public space in this country, knew he could be heard on Pacifica Radio. James Baldwin debating Malcolm X over the effectiveness of nonviolent civil disobedience in the South, broadcast over the airwaves of WBAI. Last week, we were in Birmingham, Alabama. It's the 42nd anniversary of the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church, the 4 little girls who died. It was right around September 11th, but it was 1963. The civil rights movement, how important it is for the Pacifica Archive to have the archive of the grassroots movements of our time. Democracy Now!, the show that I do, started in 1996, is the only daily election show in public broadcasting. We're now 10 years old, and it's been an amazing 10 years. Right around September 11th, we started broadcasting on television, on one public access TV station in New York, Manhattan Neighborhood Network, and then it just started to take off. Now broadcasting on close to 400 radio and television stations, on Pacifica stations, increasingly on NPR stations, and you know, NPR stations and PBS stations as well, and on NPR stations, beating and fundraising, Morning Edition, and All Things Considered, because I think people are hungry for those independent voices. Also on public access TV stations all over the country, and on the 2 satellite networks, it's those 2 channels on each one that don't sell Bowflex. On Dish Network, it's channel 9415, which is free speech TV and independent channel. 9410, it's Link TV, and Link is also on DirecTV on channel 375. And we're podcasting at democracynow.org. Our headlines are in Spanish and audio and transcript. All the transcripts are there. You can go and get us there until we're broadcasting right here, although I understand we're on Dayton Access TV sometimes, and you could ask them to broadcast across the week. You could ask the PBS station where Phil and I just were, the NPR station. That's how it, every week, 2 to 3 new stations pick us up. And I think it's about people being sick and tired of being fed lies. I mean, Bush administration the Bush administration could not have sold the idea of weapons of mass destruction to the American people alone. Sure, Bush could have stood on the steps of the White House with a megaphone, and some people would have believed him. But he had something much more powerful, the most powerful institutions on earth. He had the media. More powerful than any bomb or missile, the Pentagon has deployed the US media, and we have to take it back. Now, on the PBS broadcast that Phil and I just did, I was saying I've just come from New Orleans to the catastrophe that has taken place there. Yes, a part of it is a natural catastrophe, the worst to hit the shores of this country. But it is made much worse by a man-made catastrophe. Part of it is global warming, and a part of it is just the lack of response, and you can't help but wonder if it doesn't have to do with the fact that we're talking about an overwhelmingly African-American city. Do you think that this would have happened in New York? It certainly didn't after 9/11. I mean, there the question is, how do we rebuild? How do we help the people immediately? I was there. I was right next to Ground Zero. I know it was very important to have the whole country converge. But in New Orleans, the question seems to be, should it be rebuilt? How can that be, this international cultural capital of the world? But being there, I really do think the media provided a model of something ripe for a change. And yes, the corporate media included one aspect, and that is they raced down. They raced down to ground zero. Now, Bush, taking his time dealing with this, coming off of the longest presidential vacation in the history of this country, it took him 2 more days beyond the levees breaking and the hurricane to even get out of his vacation home in Crawford. It was astounding. But one effect of that, and not mobilizing the forces to go down, is that when the media got there, there were no troops to embed with, like we see in Iraq. And so they were there with the victims, standing in the flood water. You would see a reporter and a body would float by. A young woman reporter interviewing a man who just lost his wife, he said he couldn't hold her hand anymore, and as she slipped away, she said, "Take care of our children," as he was holding his boy. And the reporter started to cry when she was interviewing him. The reporter's in the same conditions as the people who were there. Now, that is unembedded reporting, and because they weren't embedded there, when the government was saying, but we have FEMA here, we have aid there, they were saying, what are you talking about? And they were actually holding those in power accountable, as it should be. And what we saw on our television screens was the horror, the bodies, the casualties, the questions, and the whole country rose up. Whether you're a conservative Republican or a progressive, everyone was appalled. Now, just think if we got those same kind of images out of Iraq. Now, even for one day, babies dead on the ground, women with their legs blown off because of cluster bombs, dead and dying soldiers. It's horrifying, but it's true. For one day, certainly for a week, if people in this country saw this, Americans are a compassionate people. They would say war is not the answer to conflict in the 21st century. But in New Orleans, one of the first things President Bush did was to quickly say, the media is not to show the dead bodies. But I mean, the media was already there. The editor at the Times-Picayune said, are you kidding? That's the story. Because they were already doing it, he couldn't stem the tide of this. But they have succeeded in doing it in Iraq, right? President Bush invoking the executive order saying that photographers, videographers, filmmakers are not to film the coffins of dead soldiers, flag-draped coffins, or the body bags coming home. Dead and dying, sick soldiers are brought home under cover of night. They know the power of the images. They know what it means when you see this. But the media is not supposed to be following the government's orders. We are essential to the functioning of a democratic society. There's a reason why our profession is the only one explicitly protected by the US Constitution, because we're supposed to be holding government accountable. We need a media that does its job.
In many ways, the relationship between the American people and the media in America is like the woman who didn't know she was married to a drunk until one night he came home sober. We don't know what kind of media we can have. Amy is beginning to, that's why she's such an important individual. Not only because of the journalism, not only because of going where the silence is, not only because she features, for example, how many civilians have been killed in Iraq? We don't know because media hasn't really reported this. And Amy has tried, and Amy has showcased Lancet, and Johns Hopkins University has very reliable reports placing the dead civilians in Iraq at over 100,000. Significant percentages of them, women and children, seniors. So not only is she doing that, but she's also giving expression to what our media could be, what it could be for us, and how effectively media has helped to silence dissent. There is no democracy without dissent. And media, led by Fox News, I mean, it's unbelievable. You have to watch this. I don't miss the Beltway boys. I can't believe what I'm seeing. I mean, Fred Barnes is just about to collapse of indignation and contempt for Cindy Sheehan. I've never seen 100 and plus whatever she is pound housewife terrify a grown man as much as Barnes, Kondracki. It's unbelievable. And the Republican Party has spent millions and millions of dollars to paint people who dissent as un-American. We don't support the troops. If we protest the war before the war begins, we are not patriotic. If we protest the war after the war begins, we don't support the troops. If we protest the war after the first American soldier dies, we are defiling his grave. This cumulative message screams at the American populace, shut up, and sing. And we have to stop it now. And I'm afraid but it's a very tough thing to do as long as we have a media so beholden to corporations who have quite literally felt that supporting the war is their responsibility. I know something about this. And not only that, protesting the war is not popular. And people on television have to be popular. That's the problem. Media, journalists are not supposed to be popular. Journalists are supposed to engage in the inelegant task of peeking under the tent to see what these powerful and righteous have in store for us. Media is not supposed to be throwing plaques at each other. Media has become almost, media has become senior assistant diplomatic White House correspondent for Far Eastern affairs. Oh, sit down. Just tell us the story, and don't be so beholden to power. Media can't wait to dine with them, be part of them. They've become part of the establishment that they're supposed to cover. I preach to the choir. How do we begin the, make your case about the Iraq War. Embedded meant, Amy is so insightful and good on this, and who's out there saying this? Embedded meant you became a public relations extension for the Pentagon. You became, how was an embedded reporter who was living with these brave GIs, incidentally, the reactionary right wing can't wait to tell us how brave our soldiers are. We should feel insulted by this. We won't know they're brave if they don't tell us. And they internalized it was we. We made an incursion. We routed out insurgents. Embedded was a public relations victory for the Pentagon and the United States military establishment.
That's right. Victoria Clark, who hailed from Hill and Knowlton, was taken by the Pentagon to be their spokesperson. And she called the whole embedding process a spectacular success, which is precisely why I think the media has reached an all-time low in this country. You look at the coverage, and you look at what happened also, what continues to happen to the unembedded reporters. You know, this past weekend was a major protest in Washington. 100, 200, 300,000 people marched on Washington. There was a mother there who spoke late in the evening. Cindy Sheehan spoke earlier. And I mean, the fact that they're so attacking Cindy, I think shows her success. They really don't know what to do with her and her ilk. These are mothers who have lost children in Iraq. I think the presidential estate, this community that it's in, will now forever be known as Cindy's Crawford. But, you know, she goes there on August 6th. She says she can't enjoy a summer vacation because she lost her son, Casey, on April 4th, 2004, Solder City. And so she decides to ask the president why she lost Casey. So she goes, she sets up in a ditch right outside the presidential property. It's not even a ranch, why I call it that. Don't adopt any of their language. It's so important that the media define its own terms. I mean, you look at just the language of the invasion. All over the world, they call it an invasion and occupation, the media in other countries. And I'm not saying the media is far better in other countries. I'm just saying it doesn't have the bias of being there with the US government. It may have other biases, but you get a sense of a very different picture. Here, for a reporter to call it an invasion was a very big deal. So they called it Operation Iraqi Freedom. Now why? That is a propagandistic term that the Pentagon researched, and the Pentagon does that. You expect that, and they can do that. But for the media to call it what the Pentagon has come up with, you know that they had a name before Operation Iraqi Freedom. The Pentagon called it Operation Iraqi Liberation, but they realized the acronym OIL, it was a little too telling. And they changed it, and so they made it Operation Iraqi Freedom. So the media adopts this, and you see MSNBC, NBC, CNN calling their coverage Operation Iraqi Freedom. And you have Dan Rather, the night the bombs fell, saying, "Good morning, Baghdad." You have Tom Brokaw, NBC, saying that night, March 19, 2003, "We don't want to destroy the infrastructure of Iraq because we're going to own that country in a few days." You put those statements together with the constant drumbeat, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and you have to ask, if we had state media in this country, how would it be any different? That It just has to be challenged. So in the daytime, you had Cindy Sheehan speaking at this protest. Before that, you know, she had been in Crawford. And we went to Crawford to do a broadcast. It wasn't just Cindy who'd lost Casey. She became a magnet for so many mothers, like Nadja McCaffrey. She's from California. She lost her son Patrick right around the time as Casey died. And Patrick, right after September 11th, had decided he had to give something back. He felt he had the perfect life, but he wanted to do something for his country. And so he joined the National Guard. He never expected that he would go to Iraq. And he was killed in Iraq. And Nadja did something quite defiant. When his flag-draped coffin was brought home, she invited all of the press, particularly the photographers and the filmmakers, to Sacramento International Airport. And she said, take his picture. Take the picture of my son's coffin. Let this country know the price that we are paying. Let his children have a picture to remember and understand what has happened in this country. She went to Crawford. And then there was Minnesota State Senator Becky Lowry. Now, before the invasion, she introduced a resolution against the war. But that's not why she was in Crawford. I was going up to give the commencement address at Northland College around Memorial Day. And I picked up the Pioneer Press. It was Northland College, Wisconsin, would come up through Minneapolis. The Pioneer Press. And it talked about the state senator, Becky Lowry, not because of the anti-war resolution, but because that weekend, Memorial Day, this past Memorial Day, she lost her son, Matt, and in Iraq. And she went to Crawford. Becky, Nadja, Cindy, Patricia Roberts, African-American mother in Georgia, lost her son, Jamal Addison. He was the first Georgian soldier to die in Iraq. She went to Crawford. Becky had asked, look at who's dying, the future leaders of this country. What will happen? Who will be our leaders? Well, I think these women, these mothers who have nothing left to lose, they are the new leaders. And we add to them a mother who came from overseas this past weekend. She is the mother of Jose Coso. He's a Spanish cameraman who was at the Palestine Hotel on April 8th, the day before the US Marines pulled down the statue of Saddam Hussein in Firdos Square. He was at the Palestine with hundreds of other unembedded reporters, Jose Coso. He was filming. There was a US tank on the bridge, and he was just following what was happening. It was around noon. And suddenly, he's filming as the tank sets its sights on the Palestine Hotel. It was as if there was a killing spree that day. Earlier in the day, the US military bombed Al Jazeera's offices, and they killed a young Al Jazeera reporter who had gone up on the roof to fix the camera angle. His name was Tariq Ayoub. His wife, Dima, in Jordan at his funeral, crying out. The US says they're fighting terrorism. Who's engaged in terrorism now? They bombed Al Jazeera and then Abu Dhabi television across the street as the reporters cowered inside, crying out in the broadcast, someone help us, when they were circling Abu Dhabi TV. And then the Palestine Hotel. Now, everyone in the world knew that it was filled with hundreds of unembedded reporters from around the world. But the US military opened fire. They killed the Reuters cameraman, Taras Prostyuk, who was filming. They killed Jose Coso. They wounded other journalists there. And Jose's brother, Javier, since that day, and his mother, Maribel, has been leading a campaign to get an independent investigation into the killing of journalists, unembedded journalists in Iraq. Mazandana, another Reuters cameraman, went to film near Abu Ghraib, and he was gunned down by the US military. They said they engaged a cameraman. The head of Reuters, the global managing editor named Schlesinger, and we've had him on Democracy Now!, has now put out this statement. This is, this is internationally respected. Reuters and AP are the two leading news agencies in the world saying, asking this question about the targeting of journalists. Others of their journalists are at Abu Ghraib. They're in detention in other places. They have been tortured. And asking, what is the US military doing with reporters? What message is being sent right now? We've heard the term shooting the messenger. But it is very frightening, the idea that the only way you can be protected is if you were embedded, and then as Phil described, you get this one perspective of war from the trigger end. But our job is to go to where the silence is, to be at the target end, to be at ground zero, to be there with the victims. What does it feel like to be there?
And we're in Aruba covering the missing vacationer, while Halliburton's stock, by the way, in the past 12 months has doubled in value from $33 to $66, and also doubling in the last 12 months was the amount of U.S. servicemen killed in Iraq, from just over 1,000 to just about 2,000. The graphs are the same. And by the way, just to continue, I'm very good at telling people what they already know, but it must be said, along the way to this war, this most secret administration of all time, this administration that has swaggered us into a horrible blunder with the total support of mainstream media and both political parties, this administration has also turned its back on the greatest idea in the history of civilization. I speak of the United States Constitution. We have this administration believes that all men are created equal unless we're scared. All men are created equal unless our name is Muhammad. We have people in cages, no visitors, no phone calls, no lawyer, no paper, no nothing. And I won't go into the long, horrible story of Abu Ghraib. Nothing has endangered future uniformed personnel from the United States of America more than the digital pictures from Abu Ghraib. The people responsible for Abu Ghraib extend far beyond the general that oversaw the prison. We have an administration that gave its tacit approval to these kinds of behaviors. And these are the same people that can't wait to wave the flag. They cannot wait to give prizes to students at Rotary Club luncheons and American Legion banquets who write essays why I'm proud to be an American. These are the same people who will tell you to shut up and sing. And if you don't support them, you're not an American. They will slam down with the aid and comfort and support of media, anybody who tries to exercise a right which has been preserved by all those who went from this nation to other nations to engage in foreign wars to protect our way of life, at the center of which is the right to dissent. If we're not going to use it now, stop sending those kids to war and wasting their blood. Stop it. We'll get a... We'll find a neo-Mussolini and we'll let him decide what's good for us behind closed doors. And our trains will run on time and people will disappear. What kind of country do you want? It's up to us. And we can be so noble. We have so much to share with the rest of the world. And here we are, standing here, allowing these radical people, they are radical, to actually shred the Bill of Rights. And millions of Americans, as they do, stand mute. We are in the company in this theater of people who have refused to be mute, who have refused to stand and allow this to happen. We are now, there's nothing controversial about us. We are in the majority. And mainstream media is catching up with us. Remember, Amy mentioned the coffins. The administration says you can't shoot the coffins coming off at Dover Air Force Base. And America's media establishment said, okay. We gave a Pulitzer Prize to the photographer who shot that picture of Tanya, the naked little girl running from the napalm, Vietnam. Remember that? Pulitzer Prize. See the pain. Don't sanitize the news. That's the reason for the First Amendment. And we have a media that is very, very intimidated by a nation, a significant number of us, consumers of media, don't want to see the bodies in New Orleans. Certainly don't want to see the bodies in Iraq. So if you're a corporation worried about selling merchandise and services, you don't want to upset the customer. And so if somebody comes along and starts to protest, you get very, very nervous. I'm not kidding. They're terrified of being responsible for the only way you can have your own television show and oppose the war today is if you're funny. You have to be funny. Al Franken, Bill Maher, Jon Stewart, they're all against the war, unqualifiably. And they're not subtle about it. They're against the war, and they have their own show. Bill Moyers, against the war, he's not funny. Go on. Oppose this war, but Think about this. It's like a little bit of humor helps the reality go down.
Phil, talk about your own experience. I mean, right before the invasion, Phil had the most highly rated show on MSNBC.
Well, I accept the applause, and because I believe it's extended to people who believe in our Constitution, who also want to extend their admiration for the families who've made the sacrifice in this war. By the way, Professor Reinert of Princeton University made this point in an op-ed piece in the New York Times. This nation's populace has not been asked to sacrifice for this war. Only 5% of us have sent a loved one to this war. There's no draft. So this is a war that this administration, not only have we not been asked to sacrifice, but we've had our taxes reduced at the time of war. Thomas Frank, you've probably heard of, wrote the book titled, What's the Matter with Kansas? This is a wonderful treatise and analysis of what has happened. Very simply, and if he could choose someone to explain his book, I don't think it'd be me, but here's his point. The traditional liberal Democratic Party base, labor, ethnic, blue collar, many minorities that made the Democratic Party what it once was, have been seduced into the radical, belligerent, don't tread on me, bombs and bullets, Republican conservative Party tent, because the people in the tent have convinced the members of what was once the Democratic Party base that they are the party of values. Think about this. Now, wait a minute. The people in the tent, those Democrats, they're for death. People in the tent are for life. Choice. The people in the Democratic Party, they're the people that bring you naked ladies and dirty videos that your children are seeing. The people in the Republican tent, the people in the Republican tent are for God. They want God in the public schools. These radical Democrats, they don't want God. They don't even want Jesus hanging on the cross in a public school. If a little public school kid sneezes, a public school teacher can't say, God bless you. That's those radical Democrats. And then he summed up his argument this way. Thomas Frank, what's the matter with Kansas? When Madonna tongue-kissed Britney Spears at the Grammys, whatever the hell it was, a music award, Thomas Frank tells us Kansans went nuts and rushed to the polls to vote for candidates who would reduce the taxes of rock stars. You know, this is, and Karl Rove, I mean, the media has, been the megaphone for this. When Bush ran against Ann Richards, she was a lesbian. That was out there. Lesbian. And then comes Bush, the presidential candidate. Kerry is French. Republicans, this is a gang that's afraid of being feminine or female or anything. I mean, these are frightened people. And it worked. This is the gang that made Bush the war hero and Kerry the war wimp. How do you do that? How do you do that? Dan Rather blew the whistle on George Bush's service in the Texas National Guard, and they made the issue Dan Rather, even though the story he wrote was absolutely true. Bush did not show up in Alabama. That's a true story. And we got all... So unless we stand up here, begin to appreciate the lead, I just can't tell you how much admiration I have for the woman with the microphone, who in 1991, in East Timor, as the only reporter there, with her colleague and journalist, Alan Nairn, encountered the goon squad of Indonesian bullies who had lorded it over East Timor, a very small island somewhere north of Australia, and just brutally took over the country. And here comes herself wanting to go where the silence is. And she looked up, and the goon squad was coming down the street. They were walled in, a cemetery over here, a wall here. They were both knocked to the ground. Alan had his head literally fractured skull with the butt of a gun. He's in spasm and he's bleeding. And she's on her knees saying, America, America, journalist, journalist. And she watched as these people gunned down 271 innocent civilian East Timorese in what is now known as the Santa Cruz Massacre. 271 is probably a low figure. To hear her telephone report of this, which came later, and her heartbeat, and her, I mean, you listen to this and you realize that you've stopped breathing. I'm in the history of broadcast journalism, there has never been a report from the center of a total massacre as immediate, as accurate as this. I don't know how old you were in 1991, I don't know how you pulled this off, Amy, but at a time when journalists are giving each other prizes for reporting handouts from the government, this woman is building a journalistic enterprise from the ground up. I've been to her studio in New York. It's an old firehouse in Lower Manhattan. Her dressing room is a nail on the wall. She does have a mirror. You know, she goes over budget. She can do it. You know. So here is the model. This is the model we're looking for. You should know where you can find her on the dial, on the radio, on Sirius satellite radio. Maybe that's your best way to get there. On television. See her, see Juan Gonzalez, her co-host. See the people that she's bringing forth to speak, because she doesn't have to worry about being popular, about having the powerful call her back. It's a magnificent achievement at a time when, you know, when I became a journalist in Adrian, Michigan, I didn't have to pee in a bottle. I didn't have to take a test. I said, I'm a journalist. And that's the way we want it. I remember I couldn't get over how powerful I was. I was 22 years old. I must have looked 12. And I had a microphone that said WABJ on it. And I could stop the mayor in the hallway like that. I couldn't get over how powerful I was. I got thrown out of a city commissioner's office because I asked the wrong question. And I began to realize, oh boy. I covered my first murder in Adrian, Michigan. I covered the prosecutor's office. I played softball with the police department so I could develop my sources, you know? Maybe I was embedded, I don't know. But it was such an instructive experience for me. Today, that station just might be owned by Clear Channel, I'm not sure. May or may not be. I looked it up, WABJ, and I got the Washington Area Black Journalists Association. So I'm not sure what's happened. But those stations today, we have one company owns, as you know, 12, 13, 1,400 stations. And nobody works at them. Mm-hmm. They're computers. They're like reverse ATM machines. They send out music that's pureed at a foreign location. Nobody broadcasts the high school football games anymore in small town America. Nobody reports the births and deaths at the local hospital, because these have now become instruments of profit for companies that are owned by people who fly in private jets and work in high-rise buildings, air-conditioned offices in New York City and Los Angeles. It's amazing. Radio is a fabulous thing. It's fabulous. I mean, it tells you, I can remember going on the air in Adrian and reporting the births every morning at Emma L. Bixby Hospital. So the reason I didn't have to take a test was because we want a lot of people getting the news, even me. The more people you have getting the news, the larger the crowd of people getting news, the more likely it is that somewhere in the collective middle of that crowd will be found the truth. And today, I'm almost off. Today, that middle is occupied by fewer and fewer companies, larger and larger in size, controlled by people who are much more interested in the price of the company stock than they are in paying any Amy Goodman to go out and embarrass this country by reporting what its customers don't want to hear. That's what we have to stop, and that's what Amy's doing the most to correct. And we know you join us in that effort. Shall we now take comments from the audience? Thank you very much. Questions? Okay, we're looking for you here. You're so much thinner in person. Anybody want to start us off? Yes, certainly.
You were talking about Bill Moyers and the NOW program, and can you talk a little bit about what's happening with this Republican administration and public broadcasting and NPR, and how obviously they didn't control that before, the corporate media doesn't as much, but they're trying to make sure that is disappearing too.
Lisa, you haven't aged a bit. Yeah. Oh, no, still. Well, Lisa's mom worked for me, so pardon the... you want to talk about that?
Well, I mean, the public broadcasting is definitely in the crosshairs right now. You know, it was founded, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, during the Johnson administration. He signed off on it. Media activists wanted, as the media was becoming hyper-commercialized, there should be an educational area on the channel, on the spectrum. And that's how CPB was born and public broadcasting was born. And now it's getting hyper-politicized. The idea that the Corporation for Public Broadcasting would be a buffer so that you wouldn't have the Democratic-Republican politics weighing on the programming, but it's becoming the place where the politics is most impinging on the programming. So you had Kenneth Tomlinson, who is head of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. It turns out he hired a quote, independent consultant to monitor the political bias of the programming of public broadcasting, monitoring, for example, Bill Moyer's program now, monitoring Tavis Smiley's show. This is very frightening. I mean, we're talking about going after programmers, and, well, we know what happened in the decades past. So now Kenneth Tomlinson is leaving, and he has been replaced by a very active Republican fundraiser. That's for the chairmanship of the CPB. And the vice chairmanship has gone to, then there was a discussion, well, if you're going to have a Republican activist, have a Democrat in the vice chairmanship. And so there's some illusion of balance. But they went with another very fiercely active Republican fundraiser. And these women, both of them women, have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars for the Republican Party and also been very active in scrutinizing NPR and being very critical of its politics, not to mention CPB overall and whether it should have the budget it has. I think people have to mobilize and put the public back in public broadcasting. I mean, this already happened. If you remember, when Newt Gingrich came to power, he tried to zero out the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and he was beaten back by Ernie and Bert, who came to testify before Congress, and they ridiculed any efforts. And that was across the political spectrum. People believe in public broadcasting. So I think that's very important right now. I mean, Bill Moyers resigned from Now, but he was under enormous pressure, and he's one of the great journalists of our time.
All right, Stephanie, behind you.
Hi, Phil, I want to tell you my mother, Willa Dallas, is a huge fan of yours, and I want to let her know I talked to you. But also, I really enjoyed your last show on MSNBC, and I wondered, is there any other chance that you're going to do another show?
Oh, thank you. I doubt this very much. I was very naive. I actually thought that there'd be something valuable about a show which may, God forbid, present dissent. I didn't realize how really, really terrified the blue suits are who preside in the carpet land of these television stations. They just don't want it. It's too much trouble. They get too much mail, and they're called communists, and they're not proud Americans, and they don't love our country, and they don't support the truth. I mean, the drumbeat is so, and more important, they're convinced that the viewer doesn't like it. The viewer won't watch, and therefore the ratings will go down, and they won't make a profit. All this is very much involved here. We don't have, the problem is not in the stars, it's in ourselves.
But, I mean, just to say what happened to Phil when he's pushed out right on the eve of the invasion, has the most popular show on MSNBC, and then a memo comes out from NBC that a study was done, and they decided, and this was all written out, that they didn't want an anti-war face as their flagship show when the rest of the stations, I think they said,
right,
were waving the flag, the American flag. It was very clear.
That was a memo that was leaked.
And then they put this Savage, well, his name is Michael Savage, right, on In Your Place. I mean, fiercely hate-filled bigot. And they knew his record. This is nothing new, and ultimately they were forced to get rid of him because of the just outrageous hate that he spewed. But that was what they chose over Phil, even though Phil was the most popular. It is very serious now, but I really do think, I mean, as has been pointed out in so many cases, whether it's around war or whether it's around the media, there is something more powerful than these corporations, and it is you. It's the people, and you give them power or you take it back. So you can decide whether Phil Donahue has another show.
Yes.
This question is for Amy. I was wondering if she was familiar with the Marine invasion of Fallujah.
Where are you? Who's asking?
In Fallujah?
I'm trying to look. No, I know.
He's
I'm just
over
trying
here.
to look for
He's
you.
over here.
Right,
Oh,
here,
okay.
right here, right here. In Fallujah, where they basically went in,
Yeah.
kicked the doors, went in the hospitals, and killed people in cold blood.
I mean, it's very frightening what is happening in Iraq, and understanding the perception of people, especially in the Arab world, of the United States, because we get such a different picture here. And it goes to, I mean, we could take this in all different directions. You know, one of the things that we certainly remember here is the images of the charred bodies of the 4 Blackwater mercenaries. That began it, and then they went in to Fallujah, and we don't know how many people were killed, but it's a horrendous number. We could only imagine. In fact, Phil, you mentioned the Johns Hopkins study, the study that showed how many Iraqi civilians died. They looked at, it was Johns Hopkins, Columbia, and a Baghdad University, and they suggest over 100,000 civilians died. They didn't even count Fallujah because they said it just would be so outrageous, the numbers, that they thought no one could possibly believe. I talked to a French reporter, and I'd encourage you to go to the website, democracynow.org. I met him in Italy. He was winning a prize there, who had gone to cover Fallujah, and he was captured by the US troops. I mean, it's just hard to believe this happens so often to reporters and we don't know about it. He works for Channel 2 in France, and they abused him for many hours. And when they saw his French credentials, and you know the whole attitude toward France and Germany of the administration because they did not support the invasion, they covered his face with a blindfold. They made him kneel for many hours into the night in the blazing hot sun, and then they released him and a cameraman late at night, and they said, "We shoot anything that moves," and just released him. He was reporting on what was happening in Fallujah, but I think of these Blackwater mercenaries who were killed, and it was horrific. At the time, Blackwater, and last night we were in Norfolk, Virginia, and Blackwater is based just about 40 miles from there. The role that these mercenary companies have played is very frightening because they allow the administration a certain deniability. And it is very frightening. It's really a kind of privatizing of the US military that's going on. A lot of soldiers are also very resentful of these private companies.
The pay is 4 times 5.
Yeah, I mean, I was flying around the country a lot this year, and I met a soldier who was coming home, and he said, you know, they work next to, who's at Baghdad Airport, we work next to these guys, and he said they're making, you know, they're making 10 times what the soldiers will make in a day. And then soldiers sometimes have to protect them as they go around, these mercenaries. And then Blackwater, you know, is among the first to make its way to New Orleans. My colleague, Jeremy Scahill, is doing fantastic work. One of the pieces that he's done is called Blackwater Down. He, along with Naomi Klein, who's wrote a piece, front page of The Nation also, called Purging the Poor. And Jeremy's been documenting this company, Blackwater, and what they've been doing. I just wanted to read you a little about the power of these companies. You know, you read about $50 billion going to New Orleans, and I'm sure many people thought, thank God, finally some help is on the way, but who's going to get that money? $50 billion. When Dick Cheney, the vice president, finally returned from his vacation, which was, he stayed longer than President Bush did. It's harder to believe. I mean, it's hard to believe what the administration did that week. And by the way, I just want to say, I hold the Democrats also responsible for what has happened over this last 10 years. I mean, let's not forget in this presidential election, we're coming up now on the anniversary of the joint authorization for war. I think it was October 10th. You look at what Dennis Kucinich said when he spoke out against war at that time. I think basically everything he said has come to pass, but he was definitely one of the few voices. The establishment Democratic Party sided with, authorized that invasion. John Kerry, John Edwards, the presidential and vice presidential candidate for the Democratic Party.
Hillary?
Yes, Hillary Rodham Clinton as well. All supported that invasion. And even when you came closer to the election, remember John Kerry at the Grand Canyon being asked, okay, when it became clear there were no WMDs, if you knew then what you know now, would you vote to do this? And he said yes. I mean, that was absolutely astounding. I think we're talking about an establishment where the spectrum of opinion is so small. And when you ask, well, when you say the media beats the drums for war, it's because the furthest they will go is reflect that spectrum. And it's almost nil so often when it counts. But Blackwater and these companies, Cheney's on vacation in Wyoming, right? He goes to Gulfport finally, I think it's Thursday, how many days after the hurricane? And that's one of the places where Halliburton has gotten $12 million to rebuild a military base, a few bases there, and he's right there, and someone screams when he's holding his news conference, a local resident, F you, F yourself, right? And, I mean, but it's a term certainly Cheney's familiar with. What did he say on the floor of the Senate to Patrick Leahy, right, the Democrat? So he's just quoting the vice president himself. But so there you have Cheney that week. He goes to Gulfport, but this is after many days after the hurricane. Condoleezza Rice is in New York on vacation. Andrew Card, I think, was in Maine or New Hampshire. Condoleezza Rice is taking in Spam-A-Lot of Monty Python. Then on Thursday, right, the hurricane was Monday. Thursday, she's shopping at a high-end shoe store. One of the customers yells, "What are you doing shopping when these people are dying in New Orleans?" And she's escorted out of the store, the customer, that is, right? And then Karl Rove gets a handle on things at the end of the week, sends the administration down. There is a lot of PR. They see this as a PR fiasco. And then they start going down. Now, I don't know how many times President Bush has gone down, but Cheney goes to Gulfport, and there is one of the Halliburton contracts. And we went down to New Orleans, and Jeremy starts talking to these Blackwater folks that are all over. They are getting a lot of money along with these corporations. Now, the media is very quick to talk about looters. No, not the corporations, right? They're talking about You know the famous picture, the comparison of the Agence France-Presse picture with the AP picture of an African-American carrying a bag, and then the white couple carrying a bag out of a store, and the white couple getting their necessities, and the African-American looter, right, taking. Well, yes, that has to be challenged every step of the way. In fact, we interviewed, and go to our website for this, a guy who comes right from here, went to Centerville High, Mike Howell, one of the holdouts in the French Quarter. Quite a character there with his wife, who refused to leave the French Quarter, takes me to the Circle K on the corner and says, let me describe to you the looters. He said, my favorite was a 70-year-old woman. She's against the street artists. She's against the homeless. And I go to the corner, and I see her with this bag of loot coming out of the Circle K. And I said to her, hey, where are you going? Isn't that illegal? She says, I earned it. And she said she races off to her $500,000 home. And then he sees a guy who's the local doctor. And he looks like Alfred Hitchcock, Mike Howell says. And he's taking a whole stash out of the broken glass and everything he can get. And he walks out, he says, I can't believe I'm a looter too. And he's got his loot and he goes home. But think about who was called looters and who is called people who are providing for their family in these dire circumstances. But the bigger issue here is, who are the looters? We're talking about corporations that are going to make a killing off of the killing in New Orleans. And you have to be very vigilant about this. Don't just give up. You can be the monitors that make your congresspeople truly monitor this money. Blackwater and who they are and who they represent. Well, I encourage you to read Jeremy's piece. You can go to our website at Democracy Now! And you can go to the Nation website and talk about the highly Bush-connected, Republican-connected family that runs Blackwater. These corporations know where their bread is buttered when they hear $50 billion. As Naomi Klein said, when you look at the city and diaspora, the poorest people in the furthest places of this country, who's going to determine who rebuilds that city? These are no longer poor people, though, she points out. These are actually rich people. They're just locked out of their bank accounts. And we better make sure they have access to that money. Certainly people after 9/11 got access to that money. What about the people of New Orleans?
Ms. Goodman, I have a question for you about the Judith Miller situation. You mentioned the Supreme Court and protecting journalists.
Yes.
What do you think about Judith Miller?
Well, Judith Miller was just released from jail. We don't know really what went on in that case. Well, I certainly write a lot about Judith Miller. I wrote this book with my brother David, and we have a chapter called Lies of Our Times. And in that, we really document what the Times did in the lead up to war. And the leading reporter in these constant front page stories alleging weapons of mass destruction was Judith Miller, the national security correspondent of the New York Times, who together with her colleagues, often co-bylined, but approved by editors right on up to the top, they really paved the way for war. It was the New York Times, the paper of record, that more than a year later, they do a critique of themselves on page A10. They have this box that says letter from the editor of the Times in Iraq, and they go through these pieces. They don't name names, right? They don't name Judith Miller as the author of almost every one of these pieces, either co-authored or authored by Judith Miller. And you compare it to their own coverage of the Jason Blair affair, that young reporter who plagiarized and fabricated stories. They did, I think it was a 5 full-page spread on Jason Blair and what he did. They said that the paper had reached a 152-year low in their reporting since the beginning of the paper with Jason. I do think they reached a 152-year low, but it wasn't because of the Jason Blair affair. It was because of their coverage of the Bush-Blair affair. And Judith Miller, using unnamed sources, which are so often high-level administration sources. This whole use of anonymous sources, and it's not just the Times, but they lead the way, It is such a misuse of a journalistic practice that is supposed to be to protect people who will lose their jobs, their livelihoods, or their families will lose their lives. I mean, you do not name someone if they live in East Timor and they're going to talk about one of the Indonesian military atrocities and their family will be killed if they speak. As a journalist, you don't name them. You say an unnamed source. If you're talking about something going on in Haiti, yes, if they don't want to be named, yes, you respect that. If you talk about a government official in this country, a whistleblower, who will lose their job, yes, you do not name them. But the proliferation of unnamed sources that are simply used to give a reporter credibility, like they have something that you couldn't find out for yourself, but in fact are simply used as cover for administration officials that go right to the president, that want to put out a lie and don't want that lie traced back to them, that is unforgivable, especially when those lies are as serious as the ones that provided the pretext for war. Those lies took lives. And so it turns out that Judith Miller was protecting Scooter Libby. I mean, we'd reported on this well. Murray Wass is a great reporter, by the way, and I encourage you, again, you can go to our website to hear this conversation, but we told all the details of this months ago, that Judith Miller was protecting the vice president's chief of staff. And of course, who were the people who did the leaking? Scooter Libby, the vice president's chief of staff, and Karl Rove, who, by the way, had already leaked a story during the Bush 1 campaign, George H.W. Bush, to Robert Novak, and was fired at that time. We need to know history. And then once again, and you have to ask, why hasn't President Bush, since we know it's Libby and Rove, and he certainly knows, didn't he say, whether this is legal or not legal, if you parse it all out, didn't he say he would get rid of any administration official who exposed an undercover operative's name?
Addie says 5. 5.
Okay, I have
5. Yes, ma'am.
yes. First, I got to say thank you, Mr. Donahue, for everything you've done for this area since your 15-minute show on WHIO. I appreciate you. So thank you. But also, I'm just astonished at the way that the Democratic Party has turned tail and run from any real issue, and it's just amazing to me. And I would like you to speak to what kind of climate exists in this nation that William Bennett can make the statement that he made about African-American babies, and nobody will stand against him with that. I'd like to hear about that.
That is an unbelievable. I just wanted to see, I brought some of the transcripts of the shows. I just wanted to see so I could quote him directly so you wouldn't say that I misquoted him, to say exactly what it was that Mr. Bennett said, not to be confused with his brother Bob Bennett, who is Judith Miller's attorney. But
if you aborted all black babies, you would reduce crime. It would be, it's a terrible idea, he goes on to say. It isn't moral to do this, but it is true that you would reduce crime. I don't believe that characterization of what he said is misleading in any way and pretty close to his intent.
You're quoting him actually.
And by the way, God bless the First Amendment. Let's hear these people speak. Let them speak. Let Falwell speak. Let Trent Lott speak. Robertson. Holy cow. Those gay people caused 9/11, or the feminists? I forget which one. Let them speak.
Right. And Robertson, you know, we were just in Norfolk, and that's where the Christian Broadcasting Network is and where Robertson is. But, you know, calling for the assassination of the Venezuelan president, Hugo Chavez. Yes, we interviewed the Venezuelan president, who's... Well, it was very interesting because he says, obviously, I mean, I was wondering, you know, that when, this is interesting, we also that week interviewed Alarcón, who's the #2 man in Cuba. He's the president of the Cuban National Assembly, who had a very interesting analysis of the hurricanes. Both Venezuela and Cuba offered aid immediately to the United States. And Cuba, whatever you think about Cuba, has dealt with hurricanes. And very few people die in Cuba. And they offered some 1,500 doctors with hurricane backpacks immediately. And of course, the US government didn't accept them. Venezuela as well offered aid to the poor of the United States. And Venezuela very much targeted, precisely, I think, because of, well, in the same way that Iraq is targeted, because they have oil. You know the joke, the little kid saying to his dad, "What's our oil doing under their sand?" But talking to the Secret Service when Alarcón came to our offices, because you know they're surrounded by the diplomatic service. Before, when we interviewed him, they surrounded us in the room. They all were there with their Secret Service coils around the #2 man of Cuba. And it was so fascinating. In the middle of the show, I said, "What does it feel like, Mr. Alarcón, to be surrounded by, to be protected by the very men who represent the government that has so often tried to kill off the Cuban leadership? Are you feeling protected right now?" But I asked the Secret Service this time, because they had just been protecting Chavez, I asked if they had sent men to Robertson to see what he was doing while Chavez was in New York. I mean, what is the direct threat? I mean, if it was in any way turned around, you could imagine what would happen to a person. But you're talking to people who are very close allies of the administration. And as for that comment of Bill Bennett, that just atrocious, racist is, you know, not even, is just putting it mildly. What will be the response? Again, it depends on you. These are not leaders. They respond to you. You are the leaders. You decide what happens.
I'm not sure what my, is this the hook, Matt?
This is
I want to go on. I know you're tired.
No, well, we don't want to, it's your party.
Okay. I know people are going to be mad, but Amy has already done another gig in Philadelphia. She did one yesterday.
We're headed to Columbus tomorrow.
Tomorrow in Columbus. Phil has
I'm not getting any younger.
2 a.m. from LA or some far-flung place. I just want to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Maddie.
Thank you. And don't go. Don't go. Stay there. Beautiful. Thank you.
You're a hit, kid.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wasn't that so inspiring? I just felt like some skin had been shed off of me just to know that we are alive here in the Dayton area and that we're going to get busy to continue to fight the fight. And it's so good to hear from you that the power is with the people. But welcome to Dayton. And on behalf of the city commissioners, I think Dean Lovelace is still here with me. Yes. And Joey Williams and Dick Zimmer and Matt Joseph. We want to give you a small token of our appreciation for coming to our city. And since you flew in here, you know that the Wright brothers are very important to us and to the world. So with that, I'm going to present these to you and say thank you so very, very much.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Can I go in this? Can I show them? Thank you. Thank you.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Excuse me, I'm opening my present here.
Thank you, Mayor McClin.
Taxpayer money right here. Yes. Thank you. Birthplace of aviation, creativity, and inventions. That is the truth. This is a city that was built on brains, does not exist on a navigable river. This is truly a city of innovation. If it weren't for Dayton, I would be parking cars. Remember, I'm the guy that brought you Madeline Murray O'Hare, the atheist. We put a homosexual right there on the Donahue show live. And Dayton, Ohio said, keep on coming, bring it to us. Don't protect us. We're big people here. We'll make up our own mind. I'm not kidding you. I owe so much to Dayton and its generous and enlightened and progressive population. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Phil. Now, I'd like to call up the city manager of the city of Centerville, where Phil lived and reared his family.
Here comes an overdue tax bill right here.
I'm sitting there tonight listening to this, and I'm thinking, oh, God, I've got to make this presentation. I've heard about the righteous public servants, the Rotarians. I'm one of those, too. And those god-awful plaques that people keep giving each other. And so anyway, we'll see how this goes. But about a week ago, we got a call at City Hall telling us that Phil Donahue was going to be back in town. And as many of you know, Phil and his family lived in our community for a number of years, and we like to claim him as one of our major celebrities over the years. And the mayor had mentioned to me about making sure that we had a plaque ready to go, but told me that unfortunately he was not going to be able to be here tonight, and would I do the honors. So I have the good fortune of living in the Pleasant Hill Platte, where Bill and his family used to live, just a stone's throw away. So I said, sure, I'd be tickled to do it. I had an opportunity to talk to one of our neighbors. There were still a few old-timers around that remember all the stories, and I said, can you tell me a couple of interesting stories about Phil Donahue? And the one lady said, yes, I can tell you. The only things that come to mind, number one, is that whenever we would get up in the morning after a big snowstorm, it was not uncommon to find Mr. Donahue's car in the middle of the street, because he would come home late at night after the news, and she said a lot of times he'd get stuck in the street and just let it sit until noon the next day. Well, after our 16-inch snowstorm debacle last year, I thought I'd better not bring that one up. It doesn't look good for the community. The second issue was, she said, I can also tell you that he has a sense of humor, but he also has a temper. And I said, I've never heard that about him. And she said, yes, she had an interesting story. She said, our family lived about 4 doors down. She said, we had a big male dog. She said, the dog used to roam once in a while, certain times out of the year. And she said, we got a call one night from Phil Donahue, and boy, was he upset. And he proceeded to tell us that his dog had puppies, and that our dog was the father. And then he added, and what are you going to do about it? She said, I gave him the answer that he didn't want to hear, and the phone conversation ended very quickly. But Phil, if you would, on behalf of the city of Centerville, it's my pleasure on behalf of Mayor Kingseed to present to you this proclamation. Today is Phil Donahue Day in Centerville. You have 2 hours and 45 minutes, Phil, to enjoy all the privileges and rights that will be afforded to you the remainder of the day. But please,
thank you so much.
Have this with our best wishes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And this audience has been the best. Thank you so much.
How do you feel about the energy of the event and the ideas that were presented here tonight?
Oh, very, very positive. Very positive. My wife and I were just talking about how the politicians, they don't represent the constituents, they represent their own personal benefits, like they're saying here. What'll prosper them, that's what they'll back, not the people who put them in the office.
I thought the event was wonderful, and I wish we had more of them. I was so grateful that Amy Goodman and Phil Donahue put this on in Dayton. There were a lot of great ideas put out there. I watch Democracy Now! Every day and get the real news.
I'm very pleased with the presentation. I think it would be fortunate for democracy and for all citizens if every voter and every citizen in the state of Ohio had been present and seen this show tonight.
So what do you think was the most important thing that you heard this evening?
Oh, I simply think the idea that you are not alone and that that the corporate media is simply not telling the real truth about things that occur not only in our daily lives but particularly in foreign policy.
It was really cool to actually see them on stage talking, exchanging, and have a chance to ask each other questions about really cool and really relevant things. And I think it was really great to hear them really talk about the media, their own direct experiences, a lot of things that I didn't even have a chance to hear about on even most news channels at all. It's just amazing. To me, it was just an emotionally fantastic experience, a very educational experience, worth every second, easily. I've been watching Democracy Now! For a long time, listening, I check out transcripts I loved some of Phil's work. I've been a follower of Noam Chomsky and so forth, and I've really had a really strong concern about media and media consolidation and the undue corporate control of that, and how hard it is to have dissenting and dissenting voices and also different voices on when the corporations are simply interested in their own agenda. So it's a lot of things, but I think I'm going to be honest with you, I'd be just fascinated just to see Amy and Phil sometime,
I watched Phil Donahue years and years ago when he had his really authentic talk show and loved it. Unfortunately, we do not get Amy Goodman in Cleveland, but she's been there a couple of times on teach-ins and things like that, and it was just a thrill of a lifetime to come see these people and hear them. I've read her book already. My daughter gave it to me for Christmas and signed, so I've read it, and I just think she's a real heroine right now. I think I think the corporations it's just so corrupt now that, and obviously they're trying to silence and squelch people who are trying to bring out the other side and the truth and everything. So I think as many opportunities as people have to hear people like Amy and to read alternative media. I subscribe to The Nation and a number of other progressive magazines. I don't even get our local newspaper or the New York Times anymore. I just have lost all faith in mainstream media.
Well, Amy Goodman brings me here this evening because I watch her all the time on WorldLink TV, the Democracy Now! Channel. And also, this may be preaching to the choir tonight, but I'm hoping that a lot of people can have their eyes open to our lack of input from our national media. After 9/11 occurred, I had WorldLink TV, and I listened to people look at the roots of terrorism and these violent acts, and I listened to the news from Berlin and from the Middle East, and then I was sickened by the embedded reporters on CNN giving the American people this glamorized version of the war, and they didn't see and smell the blood and all the suffering that our actions inflicted on the people. And I think that the big corporations control the media, and we are spoon-fed what we get on the media.
I feel the media has become more closed, and it's harder to get information. And I think a good example is that during Hurricane Katrina, it was amazing how the reporters were able to get in and really get the news out very quickly to the American public. And I think that if, that's what the media is supposed to do. It's supposed to be access immediately to incidents in our country, and it's not supposed to be filtered by our government.
So what kinds of viewpoints do you think are being left out in the way media is currently dealing with public issues and news?
I think all kind of viewpoints are left out because I think often the media takes on whatever lead it gets from, it seems, from political parties. And so it is not truly the media anymore. It tends to be more of what the media or what the political party wants people to know about certain issues. And so I would like it to be the media of the old that told a story regardless of what political parties thought or who it was embarrassing. And not so much sensationalized. I think we're getting to the media where it's so sensationalized now that it's almost like if it isn't something, it's almost like Ripley, Believe It or Not, is what the media has become instead of true journalism, where you are investigating something and reporting it. And I think reporters are losing that skill of being investigators.
Phil Donahue and I were friends and neighbors when he lived here in Centerville, and so it's always good to see him. And I was really happy to see Amy here too, because I was trying to figure out how in the world can we help encourage media like yours and like Amy's. I've signed 1 million petitions and sent a lot of letters to congressmen and everything, but I haven't seen a whole lot of a change in the mainstream media. So we need to really, figure out how to get you guys on the air more, and like to see Amy on 800 stations.
So do you have any ideas of ways that people can help to change the American system of media and how people get their news?
Well, first and foremost, each individual should always be skeptical, remain and keep a skeptical and critical mind. Sometimes it's very difficult to do. I feel like we've been, with a lot of, there's been a perversion of news. We get a lot of these tabloid news online, on television. You turn on your primetime news and you get half an hour of Michael Jackson, you get, and Kobe Bryant and these kind of things. And what we can do is support projects like Democracy Now! With donations, through word of mouth, and I think that's one of our responsibilities, to get back the airwaves into our hands, into the people's hands.